Yeah.
All right. Well, first I want to thank you for coming today. Uh, the two topics that we're going to try to cover today are audience engagement and then stakes. So, and we might blow the lines a little bit if you have any questions or if there's any areas of creative writing that you're, maybe working through or potentially struggling with. I don't know. Are you writing yourself?
I'm aspiring, right?
Okay, excellent. That's a great place to start. Is there something you're working on right now?
Well, I love writing poetry. I come from the corporate world.
Oh, fine. Okay.
So I was a little head of marketing, and so I did a lot of like content writing.
Oh, okay. I used to work in marketing myself, so.
You did? Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And worked for like a Fortune 500, and
Yeah.
you know the.
Yeah, right. Been there, done that. So now that I can just live out my dream and figure out what I want to do, I'm like, I love writing. So poetry, I don't know, speaks to me. I love it.
Yeah.
So I write poetry just in private for fun. But
Excellent. I mean, that's what Emily Dickinson did.
yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know that it worked. After her passing, it seemed to work out a little better.
Yeah. That's always the way, isn't it?
Right, yeah. Edgar Allan Poe was the other one. I believe he died penniless. I'm really not selling this, am I? So poetry, I wasn't going to focus much today, but I think that these concepts can still apply.
Yeah.
So the first part is, I want to start with engagement. So engagement is, and this is a broad concept, but has a lot of application. So essentially the way engagement works is that you are giving a meaningful statement, or you're giving a statement to the audience that is meaningful to them. So for example, the literary community is usually not a big fan of like Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey, but these book series were very effective in hooking a particular audience and speaking to them on their level. So one of the examples I like to use is the Marvel movies. So the Marvel movies, and I describe it as like a series of hooks. So with Marvel, with DC, Batman and Iron Man, I kind of consider them sort of the same character. You've got the initial hook of there being this superhero, this billionaire that decides to become a hero, decides to fight for justice, fight for the common person, and each one of them has their own journey to that. I think that it's not an accident that both of those characters are billionaires, and that there's an importance to that in that, because I mean, Iron Man could just be an engineer. He could just be a rogue scientist that just builds this cool suit. But him being a billionaire is these people. So, I mean, when you hear about a rich person in the news mistreating their employees, laying a bunch of people off, but then buying themselves like another yacht that year, we all kind of roll our eyes and like, of course he did. But when you read a story about a billionaire, about Bruce Wayne, about Tony Stark, and they are selflessly giving, out there putting their lives on the line, out there sacrificing for the good of others, it's a heartwarming story because we don't see it every day. It's trying not to get into like the political sphere here, but we see a lot of abuse of power throughout all of history. And so that's one of the things about Superman. Superman, we see this very powerful character, this character that can pretty much do anything, and yet he just fights bad guys. He doesn't become this tyrannical overlord. He doesn't become this oppressor that he could easily be. He decides to fight for justice. So that's the first hook. The second hook is, and some have described this as the promise of the premise, but essentially what you're doing with the second hook is delivering. So the first is I'm drawing you in with my unique concept. One example that I like to use is Lord of the Rings. Now, it's a dated concept, but when it came out, there really wasn't any other literature like that. In fact, Tolkien, in a lot of ways, kind of invented, defined the modern fantasy genre. So when he was writing that story, it was something unique. It was something different. It's got this world in a way that we've never seen before. We're introduced instead of, okay, so backdrop to Tolkien's writing, the predecessors to him were these Anglo-Saxon epics, these great warriors that were kings and knights, and they fought these great battles and defeated all these enemies, and that was the story over and over and over again, fighting giants, fighting dragons, and you have that in Lord of the Rings. But I think he specifically chose to follow the story of the hobbits. You follow these people, they're meek, they're not they're not imposing, they're not warriors by any stretch, but they're the ones that are called to this adventure. And it's the least likely person that ends up being the one that carries the ring to Mount Doom when no one else knew that they could resist the temptations of that. So hook 2, delivering on that. Then hook 3 is and not every story has this, but I think it's something that is helpful. So hook 3, it can also be described as a plot twist. So with hook 3, you essentially have something that you didn't expect in the story. Now it can be a twist. You're like, oh wow, I did not see this coming. It can also be something surprisingly human. So for instance, Batman. Batman is this larger than life. He's beating up gang members and mafia and these crazy supervillains, but then he falls in love. And there is this relationship between him, and in the movies it's Rachel Dawes, in the comics it's various other characters, but there's this human element that I don't want to say pulls away from the main plot, but it's like a sidestep to it. So you've got this promise of all this action and this adventure, and then there's this very human moment where this larger-than-life hero lets himself be vulnerable. And then that's twisted against him in the second movie. Are you familiar with the Batman, the Christopher Nolan? Yeah, Christopher Nolan series.
A little bit.
Okay. The second one is a great example of setting all of this up. So as far as engaging the audience, from the get-go, you have that great opening scene where the Joker is robbing the bank. Do you remember that scene?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he's robbing the bank, and then one by one, all the different robbers of the bank start taking each other out. Oh, I was told to kill this guy off. I was told to kill this guy off. And then Joker finishes off the last guy and even gets threatened by one of the bank tellers, like, do you know who owns this bank? It's this big mafia boss. And Joker's like, that means nothing to me. And so you immediately get a very clear vision of who this character is, that they're dangerous, that they're methodical, that they'll do anything to justify their means. They don't care who gets hurt along the way, and they're not afraid of anything. And so you've got this very clear-cut bad guy that is very intimidating from the get-go. They do a similar thing with Bane in the third movie, where he hijacks a plane. He hijacks a plane, takes it over in midair, and then parachutes out with the guy that he came there to abduct. Which abducting somebody in a jet in midair is just wild to begin with.
It is, yeah.
But the way he is just cold and calculating all the way throughout the film. And then he has one of the henchmen that just stays behind. It's like, you have to go down with the ship. And the henchman doesn't question it. The henchman's just like, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. And you get a really clear idea of the devotion that this person has from their followers. And you're like, oh, this is going to be a menacing antagonist for our hero to try to deal with and overcome. See if you can find room in one of the rows. Just gonna get a sip of water. So the other end of that and would be stakes. So when I talk about stakes, I talk about, and there's a lot of earlier writers or younger writers or newer writers struggle with this because they think that amplifying the stakes is to make the conflict bigger. But at least at this point in history, we've seen so many movies about an asteroid is going to hit the Earth, we've got a zombie apocalypse, there's this super villain that's got this death ray or whatever, we've seen it. And so the world ending on screen doesn't hit us the same way. However, and if you often notice, I'll take Independence Day. I'm going back over the ways here to the 90s, but the Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum movie. Independence Day, two of the main characters are separated from their wives. Will Smith and the president, I can't remember the actor's name, but they're both separated from their wives. So it's not just this big invasion. It is the individual people they are fighting for, and they don't even know where they are. It's pre-cell phone. They have no way to get in contact with these people. So there's this constant worry and concern of, I'm not just fighting that monster. I'm not just fighting for mankind because it's too broad of a concept to really process as an audience member. Fighting for somebody you love, somebody you care about, that is a lot more engaging. Those are bigger stakes. So it's not that the conflict got bigger, it's that it got more personal and more important to the main character. Another great example is there's a series on it now, but it was a video game before called The Last of Us. It's on HBO right now. It's their big hit show. It's a zombie-ish apocalypse. I don't know if any of you have watched it, but the story is not just about the survival of the main character, but it's about this young girl that he rescues. I think she's like 12. And he becomes the surrogate father to her, and he didn't want to. He doesn't want that responsibility. And the reason, you find out in the first opening minutes of the show, so I'm not giving anything big away, his daughter died. She died during the initial outbreak, and so he does not want that responsibility because he doesn't want to feel as harsh with again. But when he does eventually develop feelings for this small girl, when he decides, I'm going to take care of her, I'm going to protect her, it becomes very, very personal for him. So we've got these people fighting each other, we've got all these zombie monsters out here, and that's a great backdrop, but it is not the stakes that we are engaging with. The stakes that we are engaging with are the relationship between these two main characters and the importance that it holds to each of them. Do any of you have any questions so far? Oh, it's still going. Okay. I'm going with thriller. Okay, I can take it in a different direction then. Let's say there's this 4-year-old girl, and she really wanted a cookie. All right, for whatever reason, she didn't do what she was supposed to. She sent to bed without the cookie. She's laying in bed and can't sleep because she's just thinking about that cookie. It's just in her mind. And so she sneaks out of her room, and the first thing that happens is the door makes this horrible creaking sound as soon as she opens it. She's like, I can't wake up mom and dad. Because if they catch me trying to get to the cookie, I'm in trouble, I'm busted, I'm back in bed. So she tries to very, very quietly open that, sneak down the hallway. It seems like every single floorboard is creaking that night. She hits every single one of them along the way, and she's looking back. Maybe the door is open. The mom and dad are right there. So these are ways that you're amplifying the stakes. You're not making the conflict bigger, but you're you're putting more in her way. And it's a very simple plot. She wants a cookie. The world is not ending if she doesn't get that cookie, but it's important to her. And it's like kind of like a Pixar type of scenario here. So you're seeing her, she's moving down the hallway, maybe the cat gets in her way, or the dog starts to bark or something like that. She's like, oh, shh. And she's looking down the hall. Have they moved? Have they woken up yet? Maybe dad sits up and is like, "Do you hear something?" No, I'm go back to bed. And the kid just freezing, not moving. These are ways to amplify stakes. That's conflict, but there is a stake there. There is something that is important to that character, but it is relevant to that scenario. So it's not always going to be life or death. Some stories, there's plenty of stories where it's about a family trying not to lose their home. They're behind on payments. Maybe one of the breadwinners has gotten injured and can't work anymore. A lot of Depression era stories were like this, where it's just about survival. But survival means a lot, particularly when you're married, when you have children, and if you don't make enough money to buy bread, your children starve. And that is very personal. Another one that is used a lot is love. A loved one, either rest. That's why the damsel in distress was such an overused trope, is because I think everybody understands being in love with somebody and not wanting to lose them. So the idea of somebody stealing the person that you're in love with and going to chase them down. Now, again, the trope got overused a lot, but you could, let's say that loved one gets cancer. And now the whole story is hoping the treatments work. What are you doing now if you're a one-income family because the person with advanced cancer can't work anymore? And then tense moments throughout that you want to throw in. So stakes are also, conflict I believe is also involved with stakes, but conflict is going to be not just an opposing force, but maybe they missed a payment on an accident on their health insurance, and their health insurance is denying the claim, and now the hospital is like, you've got to go. We can't treat you. Now what do they do? And so then it's figuring out that you've painted them into that awful corner where There's all this tension and anxiety that they don't know what to do next. Now, a good way to work through that is to know, kind of plot things out a little bit and have an idea of a resolution. So if you get an idea of a resolution or an ending of like, okay, they find out that, I'm trying to think. So it depends on what type of story you're telling. Like the person could die, and that could be the story is the resolution of that person learning to live without their loved one and dealing with the grief. In which case, that person's probably going to die like first third of the movie. If it is saving their life, maybe there's some treatment in some, well, maybe it's not cancer. Maybe it's some, relatively unknown disease. There's this one treatment center in this one place very, very far away. We have to find a way there. All right, we don't have enough money. We don't speak the language there. We don't know how we're going to get there. So it's trying to find a mode of conveyance. Then perhaps the plane breaks down. Perhaps the person takes them to the wrong location. All these things that get in the way, but that there's this ticking clock at the same time that the husband or wife is getting sicker and sicker, and you can show that throughout the story as they're deteriorating. They're starting to give up. They're starting to lose hope. The protagonist that you're following is trying to keep their loved one alive, or make it a child, but they're trying to keep that loved one alive. That is continuing to break down and cause anxiety for both of the characters. So you want to throw a decent amount of obstacle in their way that they have to overcome, because if there's no obstacle for the characters to overcome, I mean, think about, we'll take the Marvel movies, for example. Like, they just get bad guys thrown at them left, right, and sideways, and there's certain moments where you're just like, they can't get out of this. They're done for. The bad guy's got all the gems, or he's got all this, army on the side. They're completely surrounded. How are they possibly going to get out of this? And you want moments like that. You want moments where it doesn't seem like your character being it. So that way that anxiety is brought to the audience of like, what happens? And that's engagement. That's keeping them connected, keeping them engaged in the story. Another example, Game of Thrones. Have any of you watched Game of Thrones? No? Okay. Do you plan on watching Game of Thrones? I can be careful how I explain the storyline.
No.
I don't want to spoil it. Okay. So one of the interesting things about Game of Thrones is that it threw a few curveballs at you very quickly in the story. The opening is that there's this big wall of ice at the northern end of the kingdoms, and on the other side of it are these people called wildlings that they've supposedly been fighting off for centuries, generations. But there's these things that are there, and we don't know what they are at the beginning of the story. They just kind of move in the periphery, and they kill off these two characters, and they just look like this moving, blurry sort of thing with this blade that cuts out of nowhere, and it's like, okay, what is that? We don't know what that is. I haven't seen something like that in a fantasy story before, quite like that. It kind of reminded me of Predator, if you remember those movies. That's kind of what that thing reminded me of. Now, this is a book series, obviously, before it became a TV show, but they set that up first, and then you don't find out what those creatures are until way later in the story. The second shoe to drop is that there's this love affair going on between the queen and her brother. And you're like, oh, that's different. And then the child of the other lord of the realm that they're staying with sees them, catches them in the act. And so they have to make a decision of what do we do? This is the noble son. If we do something, he's going to talk. Like what? And so this grown man takes this 10-year-old boy and throws him out a window at the top of the tower. And so very quickly you get established that you're like, this is not your traditional fantasy story. This is much darker than what we are used to. And that's the promise of the premise. That is you set up this interesting setting of like, there's this cloak and dagger stuff going on, but you realize, okay, this cloak and dagger stuff isn't just between equal partners. Nobody's safe. And that's the thing you kind of find out throughout the course of Game of Thrones, that nobody's safe in that series. Who you think is the main character throughout the entire first book dies at the end of that book. And you've got 6 more books to go, and you're like, where do we go from here? That was the guy. That was the person we're supposed to be rooting for, all, and they're gone. And it's like, okay, so where do we go from there? The other element of stakes, engagement, I'm kind of using them, they're not interchangeable terms, but I'm kind of covering both topics together. There is a lot of discussion about the types of stories out there. There's the 36 plots. There's the three, man versus himself, man versus nature, man versus God, I think is the third one. And then you've got Ron Howard, who I remember in one interview he said that he believed that there was only one plot, one story. Now I didn't catch the end of the interview, so I don't know what his version of that one story was, but I know what mine is. Mine is a search for balance. So at the beginning of each story, something happens that disrupts the status quo, disrupts the natural order of things for the main character. So for Lord of the Rings, there's a reason why the movie doesn't begin and end with the hobbits sipping tea and eating bundt cakes all the way throughout the story. This thing is thrust upon them that we're like, you have to go do something about this, or everyone here is done for. And so this kind of portly fellow that is not an adventurer gets swept up into this kind of against their will, but if they don't, much more dire circumstances are at stake. So with the cancer patient, this couple, everything might be going all right. The first opening pages is like them having tea, having breakfast, and then the husband starts coughing uncontrollably. Then they're like, okay, that was weird. I'm okay. But you get the sense that something's off. And then a few moments later, they get short of breath or even fall over at the table. And we're like, okay, we need to go get you checked out. We need to go find out what this is. Now, doing things earlier on to really engage yourself with the audience or with the major characters is very important. So that way, when one of them is put in danger, it matters more. A quick and easy way to do this was, did you see the movie Up by Pixar? That's a great example. You get this 2 or 3 minute breakdown of his entire relationship with his wife. Very, very quickly, you get the whole breakdown of they got married, this cute little love story. They wanted to have kids, couldn't have kids, had this vacation fund. They planned on going on this really big vacation one day. It never happened because she got sick. All their money got caught up in it. And you have this great shot of, in the beginning, when they started dating, or when they got married, there's all these people there, everybody's happy, and it's the same church, and it's him standing by himself. There's nobody else there. And you get a very clear, it matters. What happens to this character matters to you now. And so there's a lot of different ways to set that up, and that's going to be up to you and your individual writing, but you want to have a reason why the audience cares. Another example, an example that is used quite often, is it starts with the character having some sort of immediate goal. Let's say Rocky. Rocky's a good example. Rocky wants to be a boxer, all right? That one took place in the 70s, but it's very much an underdog story. But if I was to do it now, it would be more about Rocky has this plans of being a big boxer. That's his dream one day. But he's having a hard time getting good fights, and I think that was in the first movie. He's having a hard time getting the fight that would lead him up the ranks to have that career. So he's got to figure out, what do I do to get that? And maybe very quickly on, he gets beat by somebody that now they're calling better contender. So in my version or in this new version of Rocky, now it's not just about, I want to be a champ. Now I've got to elevate myself back up, get my confidence back, because I got beat really bad by this guy that I didn't realize was better than me. And now I've got to beat him to get the title shot. So now there's this sort of additional angle to it. I'm trying to remember all the plot pieces of the first Rocky movie. But essentially, but you are rooting for this guy from the beginning because he seems like a nice guy. He is down on his luck. He has a very clear goal, and we kind of want him to succeed at that. I want to look back at one of the hooks. Well, first, before I continue off any further, does anybody have any questions right now, or is there maybe something that you're working on?
I was just thinking, you suggest or you recommend always that the audience will you identify something that she can identify?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So having that helps, because even if it's like we're talking about superhero movies or something like that, having the character, forget their costume on the way somewhere, or have an argument. I think there's The Incredibles, where it's this nuclear family unit, and they're arguing with children, and there's this sort of dynamic where the kids are wanting to go off on their own and do their own thing. So even though it's a superhero movie,
I just
it is a really good. There's conflict within them. It is an everyday sort of circumstance. The old battle epics where we're just watching these mighty heroes like Hercules and stuff like that battle these giant monsters. I think that resonated a lot with earlier audiences. I think now, you need, for instance, the Hercules movie from Disney. Hercules falls in love with Meg, and he finds out that he's the son of Zeus, so he wants to get his place back with the gods, but he doesn't know how to do that. So he starts doing all these heroic deeds, trying to take his rightful place, but it doesn't necessarily lead where he thought it would. He gets frustrated with that. He doesn't know what to do. I think a lot of us have that, where we have something that we wanted that we couldn't get. And then it's like, well, how do we get it? I don't know. How do you become a best-selling author? How do you get the promotion at work that you wanted? How do you get the person that you've got this crush on to notice you and to want to be with you? And these are all elements that are those aspects of humanity that show up in there. And the more you can make the conflict very human, and you can make the obstacles very human as well. But the backdrop can still be immense. It doesn't have to all be slice of life stories. It can be the world is going to end in 7 days. There's some ticking time bomb, or there's the sun's about to crash into the Earth's about to crash into the sun, or something like that. We've got 7 days. All right, this character, what are they going to do with those last 7 days? Well, he's maybe like a 30-something that's down on his luck and is alone, and he's like, you know what, there's this girl that I always like. I'm going to try to ask her out. Well, the world is just falling apart. There's mayhem everywhere, but we're following this hapless guy in his quest to find love before the world ends. Even though we know everything's done for in 7 days, we're following this. That's what he's deciding to do at this time. And it can be funny because you could have riots going on in the background and all this chaos and pandemonium, and no, this is my goal. This is what I want to do. And it's that human element, but it is done in an engaging way. And that might be, that's an example of, so the other thing you want to have is in engagement, you want what you're doing to connect with the audience in a unique and meaningful way. Unique is the tough part. We've had a lot of stories told already, so it's like, what can we do that it hasn't already been done to death? My Big Fat Greek Wedding was a great example. So you've got this rom-com, but now it's this rom-com where she brings her, vegan California boyfriend to meet her very loud and vivacious Greek family, and we don't know how that's going to resolve. Meet the Parents was another example where Ben Stiller is really intimidated by meeting Robert De Niro and his wife as his new potential in-law. So he starts getting flustered, making up these lies, trying to backtrack, and it was a little over the top and ridiculous in that movie, but it was very much, I want this to work out with me and my wife, and my obstacle is I've got to get my dad blessed. And so everything in the story, even if there's this other stuff going on, that's backdrop, and you can have all the backdrop you want, but you want to be clear about what does the character want, what's in their way to get it, and you can have fun with that. Once you know where you're going and you know this is the goal, this has to happen by the end of the story, you can throw everything in that character's way because you know you're going to end up here. The audience doesn't know that. They don't know whether or not this character's going to succeed or fail, but you do. And so once you figure that out, and that's why I suggest a certain amount of outlining. Some people just sit down, start typing, and just see where it goes. My hat's off to them. I've done that sometimes, but eventually I've gotten more into outlining in recent years, at least to a degree, because that way, again, I don't write myself into a corner and I'm like, okay, I wrote 150 pages and I don't need to know where this is going. But sometimes you do that. Sometimes you write several chapters just to see where the world is. And then you take a step back and like, huh, this isn't the story I thought it was going to be. And I've heard lots of other authors like research. I would recommend it. So it depends on, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can research. So I write a lot of fantasy. So a lot of my research is about languages, it's about history, about weapons from different time periods. So that's a lot of stuff that I research. They say write what you know, and I think what they mean by that is that you want to have a basis of knowledge going in, but definitely learn more as you're going. So if you are a chef, like if you love to cook, and you want your character to cook, but maybe your character needs to learn these recipes, or this character is learning Italian cuisine and you know nothing about it, that's going to be a little bit of research that you need to do. And research, I actually did a workshop on research not too long ago. You want to balance your research. You definitely want to do your homework and make sure that you understand the setting and context of the story that you're telling. You don't want to cripple yourself with research. And I've seen writers do this. I've been guilty of it myself, where I'm doing research, and then I realize I'm not writing anymore. So I need to do the research I need to do, get the knowledge base that I need to get, and then continue with the story. Does that make sense? So as far as we've touched on stakes, we've touched on engagement. I've got some great first lines here, but I wanted to review. Because also having a strong opening is really important. So yeah, the introduction of the story. So from 1984 by George Orwell, it was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. And from that line, you're like, clocks don't strike 13. What's going on here? You know right away you're being taken into an unfamiliar world. And that opening also sets tone for the story. So a lot of times when you have a strong opening, like for the Batman movie we talked about, that whole heist scene with Joker and taking out all these people, you know you're going to have a fast-paced story with a lot of action, a lot of movement, a lot of violence. Like people are going to get hurt in the story. You know that going in. Game of Thrones, from that first episode where there's all this really kind of weird intrigue from the get-go, you know what kind of story you're in. And that helps inform the audience of like, this is where we're going. This is the type of story we're telling. But it also informs you as the writer, because once you've established that strong opening, you're like, okay, here's where I'm going, and that kind of helps me move on. One of my favorite openings, I don't have the exact wording. Let's see. Oh, here we go. This is from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The story so far, in the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. So, you know right away there, it's comedy. Things are going to be goofy. Things are going to be a little tongue-in-cheek, and that is the style and the tone of Hitchhiker's Guide throughout all the rest of the books. And that kind of helps you set that up. But also for your peace of mind, for your knowledge, that this is the direction we're going to be going throughout the rest of the story. Now, that's not saying that tone can't shift or change depending on the plot points that you're going through. And there's tons of information available about plotting, about different points to hit. Two of my favorites are there's an outline called 27 Chapters, and it is a very thorough breakdown of what plot points to hit and where. My favorite one is Thomas something or another. I can't remember his full name, but he writes a very good breakdown of the 27 Chapters outline. And that one's focused more on novels, but I think it would work for screenplays as well. I write screenplays as well as novels. Then on the screenwriting end of things, there's this book called Save the Cat. And the Save the Cat gives you 15 plot points and says these are the plot points that you want to hit in screenwriting. Now, what's interesting about studying screenwriting as a writer, whether you're going to write screenplays or novels, is that screenwriters are very big on structure. Now, when I go to workshops where it's mostly authors, it's mostly novelists, structure is kind of like referred to very amorphously. Like there's no one size fits all. Do what works best for you. But in screenwriting, at least Hollywood has this down to a science. So they are inciting incident needs to happen somewhere between page 5 and 7. I remember the first time I heard that, I said that's a joke, right? You expect me to hit this inciting incident in that narrow of a margin, and they're dead serious because that's become not just a formula for the filmmaking, but also for the readers. So to even get to a producer, you've got to get through the readers, and the readers will sometimes just flip to page 5, page 15, page 30, and if the moments aren't happening, they toss it. And I know that sounds very draconian, but they just have so many people applying to get their movies made. But the nice thing about studying that, even if you're not writing screenplays, if you're writing novels, is that you are understanding structure very concisely. Okay, here is an inciting incident. Here is what plot point 1, plot point 2, and plot point 3 look like, or a midpoint. And there's a lot of different, Safety Cat is a great book for that. There's also, if you want to look at 15-point plot structure, there's a lot of articles about that online. But that gives you a very specific idea of how to structure a story. So if you're ever lost, if you're ever writing and you've got your first 8 chapters or 3 chapters or 10 chapters, and you're like, I don't know where to go next. Checking out those outlines will help a lot because you're like, okay, this is what traditionally happens in other stories. And it's not saying that your character has to get betrayed on this, it's not telling you stuff like that, but it's telling you these are the types of things that usually happen by these places in the story. What kind of story are you working on?
It's just different, and there are two different things. It was a natural disaster that took place in my parents' hometown.
Okay.
1970, and I know the survivors. They're actually some of them are relatives, and well, that's one of the ideas.
That's great. So one of the pieces of advice that I try to give people, because I've talked to a lot of writers that want to write about a personal experience or about their lives. And one of the examples that I had somebody throw at me is they're like, oh, well, all these different actors or these politicians or things like that, these celebrities have written books about their lives. Why can't I do the same? And it's not that you can't. I'm not for a moment saying don't do that. But what you want to know is you need to know what the conflict was, and you need to know what the climax is. So for your average celebrity, like let's say we're reading the biography of Ronald Reagan or George Washington. Okay, George Washington is a good example, but a president. And we're reading their biography, and the point of the biography is that this is how I became president. So all these things that I did, all these trials and tribulations, elections that failed, sleepless nights in law school, meeting with all these big wigs, working for these other politicians to work my way up, it all led to here. Same thing with actors. If there's an A-list celebrity, their first big breakout film might be the climax of their story. That's like everything, all these auditions that I went to, all this, acting coaching, living in a dingy apartment with 5 other people, so I could afford to go on auditions and stuff like that. But when I got this big role, then everything else changed. So that's an example of a biography. But for a natural disaster story, like you're talking about, was somebody rescued, or what? Do you have an idea of where the climax is?
Well, there are locals. This happened in Peru, but one of the survivors actually was not a real survivor. They were a group of climbers. They were climbing the mountain at the same time.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it's just
and that's how they survived. That was how they survived, was by climbing away from water.
Yeah, actually, it was how this happened. And it's, so it could be from the point of view of one of the climbers that was not a local. There was one of the ladies from New Zealand.
Okay.
So I was just thinking about that.
That's great.
It was just ideas.
So a suggestion that I would maybe give is set the pipe earlier. So maybe it starts off with rock Maybe it starts off with a particularly dangerous climb that one of them had, or, something where they learned something from that climb. They were unprepared for a snake bite or a piece of rock moving that they were climbing on, or whatever, something that they learned early on from there. And then when it was time to escape the flood, they applied that same thing that they learned later on. Just an example. And you don't necessarily have to do it that way, but you want to have a through line of, okay, we're going through this, these are the things that are happening, and also these are the little moments between the characters that make that get us invested in who they are as people. Maybe there's a conflict between two of the characters. Maybe the father and the son are not getting along right now for whatever reason. But then when this disaster happens, this is bigger than us. All these petty things that we were upset about before, this is so much more important. Now, I don't know these people, so they may have their own version of the story, and they may have a version of the story they want you to write versus things that they don't necessarily want put in there. So I don't know if you have any constraints like that, where if you put X, Y, and Z in the story, people are going to be mad. It's like, I can't believe you put that in there. You know what I mean? So something to consider, but you want to engage the audience early, and you want to have something where, that sounds, if it's going to be like a fictional story based on the events, or is this going to be kind of just a retelling of what happened?
Could be both.
Okay.
Could be a mix.
All right.
Fictional, could be the facts.
All right.
What happened.
So that'll be a decision you'll have to make, is do you want it to be kind of a retelling of what happened, in which case, what are the parts that you can dramatize there? Or I'm just kind of taking these general characters, or this general happenstance, I'm making up my own characters, but I can kind of make them a blend of these two people I know, or these other people, this one person that I knew that did such and such, and you can kind of throw them in there. It's fun to do that because there's no rule saying you can't. And, if you've got people in your life that have very powerful voices. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about just being loud, but very distinct voice. Like, you might have a cousin that, like, as soon as they enter the room, everybody's like, oh, you just hear them talking from, a block away, and you're like, oh, that's so-and-so. Or somebody that just has a very distinct way of carrying themselves. That's fun. That's fun to use in a story, because they're characters you don't even have to create. These are people that you know these people, and you know their voice. And so you just let that voice kind of carry over, and it's like, okay, well, I set up a situation like this, I put them in this difficult situation before they can get to safety, or even, they might even be able to get to safety right away. It's a full-length novel. They might have to go collect everybody under these various dangerous circumstances, putting themselves at risk each and every time that they're trying to get their cousin, or their dog, or a small child, or Abuela might be, in the house over here, and she's way down here, and she's just refusing to leave her house. She's like, no, I'm going to weather it out. I'm not letting my house be destroyed by the storm. And stuff like that happens. So it's like, all right, we're just picking up Grandma, throwing her over her shoulder, and we're going up the hill. And now we're climbing uphill with Grandma fighting us the whole way, And that's an example. It doesn't have to be comedic. It can be. Or it's just the engagement is the conflict. It is these very human characters overcoming something that seems like it will defeat them, and our engagement with them, our love of these characters, is the way that they handle it. I read somewhere, and I can't remember who said it, but that we enjoy watching characters struggle more than we like to see them succeed. We want to see them succeed eventually, but they've got to struggle first. Because if the character
first or in the middle, you build it up until they struggle, then there.
Yeah, and you can have little things they're struggling with earlier on. So it doesn't, even before the storm starts, maybe there's, what's an example? Maybe one of them has a problem with their car. Like, they're starting off and the car's not working, and they didn't, like, I've been mentioning this all day. You know what? Just leave it. We'll fix the truck later. No, I've got to get this truck right. And then later on, they need that truck. Because it's like, oh, I didn't get it fixed. Well, we got to fix it now, or again, there's 2 or more characters that they are, I left not going water over here. There's 2 or more characters that they are at conflict with each other. Maybe this man and his mother haven't spoken in several years because of something that happened when they were younger. And now he's got to go save his mother that doesn't even talk to him. But he's like, I'm not, we're mad, but whatever. I've got to get you away from this place before this whole part of town is gone. And then as you go through the 27, if you pick either the 27-point outline or 15-point outline, you'll see moments in there that you can kind of brainstorm with the story that you're working on, saying like, oh, okay, I can do this here, I can do that there. And I don't have the PowerPoint with me. I might do another lecture either here or somewhere else on that. I'll try to throw it on YouTube. I've also got a email list in the back if you want to join that. I can keep you updated on different things that are coming up. I was expecting a little bit larger group. There's usually a little bigger group at these events. But if you've got any questions about stakes, about engagement, or if there's just another aspect of storytelling that you'd like to talk about, we've got time at this point.
How important? I was just thinking about first the opening.
Okay.
There's this writer that says that she always starts writing on May 13th. Has to be the same date every time she writes an novel. I don't know if she makes a ceremony. Is it that important? Or
So there's what they call the process, and the process, it's not just for writers, it's for actors. I was actually just having this conversation earlier about how all of these actors have this different process to get into character, to stay in character, to make themselves feel or respond a certain way. I think waiting until May 13th every year to start a book seems a little extreme to me, but if it works for her, it works for her. Other people like to drink coffee when they're writing, or they like to drink red wine, or they like to, play a certain type of music. Stephen King likes to listen to Metallica when he's writing. I can't listen to music with lyrics. If it's got lyrics on it, it's just drawing me out of what I'm writing and into whatever they're talking about in the song. Other people can't. So finding your groove is important too, but more important than that is scheduling the time. And that is probably one of the biggest obstacles a lot of writers have, is scheduling out when are you writing. So not just under what circumstances, but what blocks of time have you scheduled out throughout the week that I'm going to sit down, I'm going to work on my story here, and everything else is going to have to wait. Some people wake up early, if you're somebody that's early in bed, they wake up a little early, maybe an hour earlier, write for a little bit, and then get into their morning routine. I used to write during my lunch breaks. I would commute on MARTA, so I would sit on the train, sit on the bus. It took longer to get to work. Yeah, I live in the area. It took me longer to get to work that way, but I got to use the time. Versus if I'm just sitting in traffic, I can't. They frown on you writing while you're driving. So
yeah, some people can. My husband writes a lot, but not novels or anything. He does research, economics, and economics.
Oh, okay.
He writes academic papers, but that's different. He can write in an airplane with noise and stuff.
Yeah.
But I was listening in the airplane to this lectures from, it was something recorded about how to write your novel by Dan Brown. And he said he doesn't even connect to the internet. The research he has to do, he puts some things, some notes, and when he's done with that chapter, then he connects to the internet.
Oh, okay.
Because otherwise, yeah, it's true. If you have the internet on, it distracts you so much.
Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in research limbo.
And then you spend hours in
Yeah.
line. So he says he doesn't have any Wi-Fi when he's writing these novels.
That's smart. Because, it's very easy to get distracted. I hide my phone from myself. I hide it somewhere. I know where it is, but as long as I can't see it, I'm not tempted to pick it up and start flipping through it. Because, again, it's another thing that's distracting you. And our time is a very, we don't get any more of it. So setting yourself up in your position to succeed, whatever that is. And unfortunately that part no one can tell you because like we've already discussed, it's different for all these different people. Your husband can write in an airplane with a lot of noise in the background, other people can't. Yeah, I've got noise canceling headphones where I would put in earbuds and play some sort of like ambient music or something like that when I was on MARTA because there's people talking, there's announcements of the next stops. So I had to have something to kind of push that out a little bit and let me just focus. I'll do the right chaos. Right, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that's pretty good. I mean, some people can really block. I get distracted very easily, so that's not a problem. But I guess it's building this discipline or trying to set up a time if it's your lunch hour or late at night or sometime and unplug everything else.
Yes.
That's the big thing.
And try to have that same time every week. So that way you're like, okay, it's this time on this day, I'm writing. Because that's how we have to do with our jobs. Our jobs have, you're going to be doing this at this time. Whereas if you just showed up and they're like, do whatever you want, show up when you want, leave when you want to, I don't know that we'd be as successful at our jobs. So I mean, I know it would be. So with writing, you kind of have to do that, and it's difficult because things get in the way. But try not to beat yourself up too much if that happens. So if you have in your head, I'm going to do lunch Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or I'm going to do evenings Monday, Wednesday, Friday at this time every day, and you're 2 weeks into it, and your sister's dog gets sick, and you got to help her rush into that. The world isn't over if you miss that one day of writing. You want to have more hits than misses as far as your schedule, but as long as you have the schedule in the first place, it's a lot easier to get back on track than to not be on track in the first place. So just
something about right discipline too, and do the concentration. I mean, concentrate enough to be productive in short hours.
I'm glad you used Dan Brown as an example. David Baldacci, is that his first name? Baldacci. He writes the thrillers. He talked about how when he was a practicing lawyer, he would wait till his children went to bed, and he would write. I don't understand how he did this. He would write every night from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and then go to sleep. That's him. I couldn't do that, unless I'm not waking up until 10 a.m. the next day. But he would.
Kids. I mean, you have kids.
Yeah.
You have to sleep.
Right. So that was things. He got kids to sleep, spent a little time with his wife, and then 10 o'clock he locked himself in his office, wrote for 4 hours, and then somehow still got enough sleep to function the next day.
Not enough to function.
Right. And so that's up to each individual, and then.
He sat down around when he wrote a Da Vinci Code, he was writing his parents' house in the laundry room, sitting on a kind of box, and it was cold. And I don't know if it was one of the novels he was writing, that he was in an uncomfortable place, but then he was so cold, he was sitting in the Arctic somewhere, another novel, I don't know.
It was
But because it was so cold in the place, and that's the place he found to be isolated, to concentrate, to be distracted. So that's finding a place where nobody will distract you.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, if you have, now with internet, that's enough to distract you the whole day.
Yes. I actually was waiting tables while I was writing my first novel, and I would keep those little notebooks they give you to write the orders on. I would have two. I would have one for whatever orders I was taking. I would have another one for ideas. And the first few chapters of The List Redemption, which is back there, I would just write it down. Like just as it would come to me, I would let my brain just kind of meander. So I guess I do write in chaos sometimes too. That's at a crowded restaurant, and I would just take like 30 seconds, write down a couple of sentences, like, okay, I'll come back to this.
Hear a conversation and something clicks.
Yes.
You get an idea, right?
Very much so. But sometimes it's just using the arena that you find yourself in. So, if you do, like you said, you've got young children and they're not going to bed until a certain time, maybe you're writing while they're watching My Little Pony or, whatever show that they're into. Or, sometimes I'll write during my lunch break during the day because that's the only hour I know I've got. So everybody else is like, hey, do you want to go get sushi with us? You want to go here? I'm like, maybe Friday, but Monday through Thursday, this is what I'm doing from 12 to 1.
That's great. You can stick to it.
Right. And that's the thing, is you will falter at certain days, and that's okay. I think that's, some writers tend to be perfectionists, and so they get caught up very much in if I don't do it like this every single time, then I failed somehow. It's easy to beat ourselves up. We're going to beat ourselves up enough in the editing process. Try not to beat yourself up too much in your writing process. Pick your days, pick your times, stick to them as much as you can, and things will come up. They're always going to. But as long as you've got that schedule, you're making progress. You're getting more written down this week than you had the week before.
And some people take years, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's fine too. Everybody's got their own window. Stephen King can knock out a book in 6 months. I've talked to authors that can do it in 3 or 4. Other ones, they need 2 years, a year per book, or 2 years per book. You've got George R. R. Martin that takes about 10 years per book.
It was on pace, right? But if they were bestsellers, maybe those were good 10 years.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Tolkien, I think, took like 17 years writing Lord of the Rings. He wrote The Hobbit, and then it was another 17 years before Lord of the Rings came out. And I would say that was time well spent. I don't know if I could sit and just focus on the same story for 17 years. But I mean, he definitely loved what he was doing.
What they used to do.
It's just a creative writing workshop we're talking about. We've been talking about stakes and engagement, and we kind of dovetailed into a couple of other topics, but if you've got anything that you're workshopping that you'd like to chat with us about.
So if I have anything I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, if you're workshopping anything, if you'd like to kind of bounce off the group here. Kind of a smaller group, as you can see.
Yeah, looks like it. Yeah, I'll just listen in.
Okay, perfect. So recapping. So with engagement, you want something that is going to connect with your audience in a unique and meaningful way. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, but you want to have something that's not just the same story that you've read 100 times. So talking about Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is the party goes and fights the Dark Lord and defeats them and saves the day. There's a lot of other books that have that same premise, but they don't have the following and the notoriety of Lord of the Rings because, because we've already heard that story. But let's see. When Harry Potter came out. Harry Potter, I've seen 100 knockoffs of. There's this school for magicians. There's this school for wizardry. There's one I saw that was interesting recently. It's a manga series called Mashley. And what it is the Harry Potter character has no magical abilities whatsoever. He's this kind of lunkhead that just works out all the time. He's just really, really fast and really, really strong. And so instead of doing any magic, he just, through sheer strength and speed, just pushes himself through whatever's going on. And it's so ridiculous watching it play out that it's funny to watch. But it's something that we've seen a bunch of different times, but there's this curveball in there. Mel Brooks was really good about that. Mel Brooks would take this concept that we were very familiar with and then just turn it on its head. Like, what was his movie? Spaceballs? Is that what it was called? Yeah. His comedic version of Star Wars. Very silly. Star Wars itself, when Star Wars came out, it was almost a blend of sci-fi and Western. They kind of had like elements of both, of the old Western and the old sci-fi. And the old sci-fi, we'd seen tons and tons of sci-fi throughout the 50s and 60s. And it was a little formulaic. The thing about, Dune and Star Wars, I think, were written around the same time, but I think the Star Wars movies came out first. But anyway, you took those two concepts, you took those two genres, melded them together, and made something new. Horror comedy, Shaun of the Dead, that one came out in, I think, 2004. It's been a while. But that was a horror comedy. I hadn't really seen a horror comedy before that film. And so it was very, very successful because it took two things we were familiar with, put them together, and made something. So with whatever story that you're working on, you don't necessarily have to reinvent the light bulb, but you want to say, okay, if this is similar to other stories, what is my unique voice? What is the thing that as somebody's hearing about it in a quick 30-second explanation, what's going to catch their attention? Engagement. We went from engagement to hooks. So how to hook an audience. So part of the hook is what is distinct about your story. What is something that is going to resonate with readers? We gave the example of Twilight, not necessarily my favorite story, but it resonated with a lot of teenage girls that were like, this sounds like a romance that I would be interested in. Then the second hook being sort of unique and meaningful. Second hook, delivery. How are you pacing the story? So Deadpool is a great example. Deadpool is a superhero action movie, but it's a comic. And so it takes a lot of the things that we're used to of these, big gunfights and chase sequences and crazy battles, but he's cracking all these like ridiculous jokes and there's these absurd situations all the way through it that sets Deadpool very much apart from all the other movies that we're used to.
So does it make it meaningful and at the same time things?
So the first part is meaningful and unique. So unique is something that's distinct. So it doesn't have to necessarily be something, it's hard to make something we haven't seen before, but something that we are maybe familiar with. I mean, if you've got a concept, you're like, there's nothing else like this. Great, write that. Short of that, if it is, you know what, there are things similar to this, here's what's distinct about mine. This is the thing that I think if people catch a tweet about it and just happen to glance past a Facebook ad and like, that sounds interesting, that's the kind of part you want to be. Something that brings them in very quickly. Then the second hook being delivery. How are you delivering on the promise that you made? So here's the type of story that I told you I'm going to tell you. What kind of tone do you set early on? So we're talking about the beginning of The Dark Knight. So that bank heist scene with the Joker, where we get a very clear idea of like, okay, this is the type of story we are going to be seeing for the next 2 hours. Then the third hook, and this one is a little trickier, but most people call it a plot twist. But I think it can be a plot twist, or it can be just something that's in the story that was unexpected. So it can be a plot twist where it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. There's this, The Usual Suspects is a great idea. If you've never seen it, I'm not going to give it away. There's a great plot twist in The Usual Suspects. It's a Kevin Spacey film from the 90s. I know he is not necessarily as well regarded anymore these days, but he was a great actor, and it's a really good movie. Frailty was one of Matthew McConaughey's first films, I think late 90s, early 2000s. That one's got a really great twist to it. But then, in place of, or in addition to plot twist, is something that's fun that was unexpected. So by that,
That's where he's like the greatest to the pulled was.
make me believe it didn't exist. I think so. They're demon hunters in the story.
That's the line.
Okay. Yeah. That's a quote from an older book. I can't remember who said it originally. But Frailty, he and his dad are demon hunters. And what can I say that doesn't give it away? Essentially you're kind of left guessing as to whether they were actually fighting demons or if his dad was just crazy. And they kind of leave a lot of that up to you throughout the story, which made it very engaging. Then, aside from plot twists, or maybe even fourth book, is little gems in the story. So these little moments that are either very meaningful or just a gut punch we weren't expecting. So when we talked about Game of Thrones, Game of Thrones, we understand it's a medieval fantasy story. We understand very quickly that there's going to be a lot of intrigue between these characters, and then a small child gets thrown out of a 4-story window. And we're like, okay, we did not see that coming. This is a different type of intrigue than we're used to, where it's no holds barred. Anything can happen. And so we're like, okay, this is a different type of story than we're used to. And I'm not saying you have to use something that jarring, but taking something, giving it a curveball that the audience isn't expecting can be that thing that very much is like, okay, this is different than anything I'm used to. I'm trying to think of other examples off the top of my head. We've gone through quite a few earlier. Deadpool is another good one where it's like action adventure but comedy. Yes, and then he talks directly to you as the audience. So it's almost like you're part of the story as well, which is fun. That made me think of something earlier. So there are, if you've noticed, zany characters like that are the protagonist or the main character are often, you're somehow included in the story. Whereas if you've noticed, a lot of main characters are kind of bland. You know, that's why the generic white guy is like in so many different movies, or the generic like teen girl that's kind of figuring things out and it's kind of awkward. It's because it's easy for the audience to be like, oh, I can put myself in there. You know, there's all this stuff going on. That character's really just the vehicle for all this other stuff to happen. And they don't really have a whole lot of personality to them. Bella Swan from Twilight. Honestly, as much as I love Lord of the Rings, Bilbo Baggins, you know, he's kind of plain, you know, but it's all this crazy stuff happening around him, and we see it through his eyes because he's overwhelmed by everything that's going on around him. Deadpool is not. Deadpool is just kind of going with it, but because he's addressing the audience, they don't always do it quite that way, but it's almost like in that type of story, you're just kind of brought along for the ride. So if you're watching a story and the main characters are all pretty zany and pretty off the wall and very different, you're just kind of being pulled along for the ride. But it's fun for a different reason versus the sort of, I don't want to call them bland, but everyman, that's the term. The everyman of like anybody off the street could be this character. And so it's easy to engage as an audience member with that person because there's nothing extraordinary. Sure. The villains?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Says you have to concentrate on more on your villainous and your protagonist. Like the villain, you have to give it even more thought.
Right. So you want to make your villains interesting, and that could be a whole other workshop. But we've got some time. How are we doing on time, by the way? Yeah, sure. Let's talk about villains. So I like villains because I've played a number of villains in movies, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. And it's been a lot of fun to play. So with villains, you want to give them a goal that makes sense for them. All right. So for like the Joker's plan is just to cause mayhem in Gotham and make people question their assumptions about their own morality, about themselves, but he sees himself as an agent of chaos. Ra's al Ghul in the first movie, he's there to punish Gotham for their transgressions. And then Bane kind of comes in and has a similar concept, but he goes about it slightly differently. What are some other, like, really, I'm trying to think. So you want to give them a clear goal, something that they are after. So there's been an argument in the literary community of whether or not the villain is actually the protagonist of the story, because it's usually the villain's actions that kick off everything that's happening. And a lot of times the protagonist is just reacting to that to try to stop them from getting their goal. And you can do it either way. You can have a protagonist that they start off in a very clear direction and the villain is just getting in their way, or the villain starts off like Thanos in the Infinity War story. He is trying to get these gems. And once he has those, he's unstoppable. So they've got to stop him from getting to that goal. But they're not, Tony Stark doesn't, whatever his plans were for that day have to be put on hold. So he's not the one driving the plot, it's Thanos. And so you want to give them a very clear goal, but also, and this is something that's been developing more in recent decades, reasoning for that goal. So the mustache-twirling villain from the 1950s or from even like very old stories where they're just evil because they're evil, that's kind of falling away. So Thanos wants to wipe out half the galaxy because he knows that there are finite resources, and he feels that this will bring balance to the universe. If half the population is wiped out, everybody has to survive. It's very draconian, it's very dark, but what was interesting is I remember leaving the theater and listening to people talk after that first movie, and they're like, it kind of makes sense. And that was the eerie part about it, is you were like, he's not completely wrong. The way he's going about it is not great, but like, he kind of makes sense. And so those type of villains are a lot of fun because they get into your head. you know, and they get into the head of the audience, and the audience is sitting there and like, huh, am I still rooting for the good guy? I don't know. And sometimes it does flip partway through the story where you are following one person, you're like, wait, no, this villain's starting to make more sense than I like them to. Sometimes as we get older, we go back and watch stories from when we were kids and stuff like that, and like, villains make more sense than I used to when I was younger, you know?
The voices and the villains or the thieves are the main characters in these
Mm-hmm.
and they make you feel identified with just a group of thieves.
All right, well, why do you identify with the thieves? What is it about them that you identify with?
They are the main characters. I don't know, they are in search of something.
Okay.
They work for months to get some job.
Right. So sometimes they're just a charming con man, and you like them because of that. Sometimes it's they're wanting to get over. So like Ocean's 11, at least the version with George Clooney, he's trying to get back at the guy that he thinks sold it wrong. You know, so he wants to get over to that guy, and that is a very human response. We all have somebody that has kind of done us wrong, and we'd like to get back at them. So through that vehicle, we're watching George Clooney get back at this guy that did something to him. And we're like, okay, we want him to succeed for that reason. He's a thief. He's stealing something that's not his. But this other guy is kind of worse than he is. And that Save the Cat is the book I talked about earlier. That's kind of the premise of the beginning of it. He has what he calls Save the Cat moments, where your hero does something early on in the story that you're like, oh, this is a good guy. We like this person. So there's this the example he gives in the book, there's this Al Pacino movie, and I can't remember the name of the movie, but there's this big group gathering where they're promising to give free baseball tickets. It's the 1980s, everybody knows. Now it'd be like NFL or NBA tickets, but they're all promised tickets to this big game. And they shut the doors, lock them, all the guys pull out their badges and like, yeah, you guys all had warrants out for you, go get in vans. Go get in cars, we're arresting all of them. What? We were here for free tickets. Like, you know you weren't. That was the ploy. And they've arrested all these guys, and you're watching that play out, and then he walks out, and there's this guy walking down the street with his son. And the guy's like, am I late for the tickets? I had to go get my son, and Al Pacino, he's the cop, he just arrested all these other guys, but he looks at him, and he's like, no, man, sorry, tickets are gone. He's like, oh, are you serious, man? Like, I got my kid all the way from town. And what Al Pacino does is he kind of opens up his wallet to look at it and lets the badge show. And he's like, yeah, man, sorry, the tickets are gone. And that when the guy sees the badge, he's like, oh, okay. And he just walks away. And that's the Save the Cat moment of like, he does his job, but because this guy was with his son, because he makes a comment like, I'll see you soon. And the guy's like, okay, great, but he wasn't going to do it in front of his kid. And so that's his Save the Cat moments. And you can give your characters different moments like that. So they can be kind of a gruff personality or very ornery or surly, but they do this one thing that you're like, okay, there's a genuine person there. There's a person who cares about others. I'm sorry, we're going off the rails a little bit. We were talking about villains. So ways to make an engaging villain. One, you want to give them a purpose. Two, you want to give them a core philosophy. And the thing about that core philosophy is that it has to run opposite. It either has to run opposite of the main character's philosophy, or it has to challenge that philosophy in an odd way. So we'll go back to Dark Knight. The philosophy that Batman has is that people in Gotham are inherently good, and that if you give them the right circumstances, they will do the right thing. Joker believes the exact opposite. He believes that everybody is out for themselves. If you give people the right circumstances, they are going to do the wrong thing. And so you've got these two philosophies that are clashing in that story. And that's why that scene in the boat is so important, where he gives the two detonators to the two different boats. Because he's like, one of them is going to push that button, according to the Joker. Because from the Joker's worldview, they are selfish creatures. One of them is going to blow up the other one. Batman, in his belief system, is like, they're going to do the right thing because people will inherently want to do the right thing. And that's just an example, but you could have something like that in another story. So let's take your main character is this hardworking small business owner, up by their bootstraps type of person. Their core philosophy is that if you work hard, do the right things, you will win out in the end. And there's this other person that's like, nah, man, I ain't got time for that. I'm going to cut corners. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to get what I want. Screw the rules. Screw other people. And maybe throughout the story, they have a lot of success. Maybe even more success than the main character. The main character's really struggling with that at points. Like, maybe I should cut corners. Maybe I should cheapen my product or screw some people over to get more money because look at how he's living. And then that character, either when the customers comes back at them, their business starts floundering because they got so many bad reviews. Maybe they get arrested for something that they were doing that was bad, unethical. And I'm just using that as an example off the top of my head, but that you have these two competing value systems, and that in your mind, as the writer, which value system wins? And so that what do you call it? That clashing of ideologies is the core of the story.
And when you write, you think about what is your value or what is the audience?
I don't know that I would necessarily try to cater to the audience's value because it's hard to say what that is. I would say if there's something that's in your heart that you think is not going to be received well, then I would work on how you present it. Okay. So, for instance, the example of hard work. Okay. There's ways you could create that character and make them a bad person. You know, that they're just like, well, no, hard work and determination is always going to be the way to go. And then if anybody doesn't live up to their standards throughout the course of the movie, they get fired, they get penalized, they get chewed out. And after a while, even though originally this was the protagonist for you, you're like, this character isn't likable at all. I don't like this person's value system because of the way they apply it. Versus if they take that same value system, but it's about pulling other people up with them and being like, look, I will teach you how to do these things. I will help you get a leg up as well because I want us all to succeed. You're going to like that character a lot more. So that's a value system of hard work and integrity as a concept, but it can be applied in different ways. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of another example, so I'm not just using that one. A big one lately has been friendship, the power of friendship, and that we want to treat people closest to us well, and that if we do that, they will eventually come around. A lot of kids' shows and movies have been playing with this concept that I've seen in recent years, but the power of friendship of like, you just got to keep doing good, and if you do good long enough, the bad people will come back around and see that what they were doing was bad. And in their stories, it usually works out. Now, you could very easily, again, have that same concept and just have that character get taken advantage of over and over again by people that don't mean well. And maybe those characters never learn. So what is the message you're trying to convey in that value system? So if it is that friendship and love will persevere, then you want to create a story where that happens. But I would say write it in a way that you believe it, not just in a way that you think your audience will believe it. Because if you do it that way, I think it's going to come across as false, and you're not going to enjoy writing it anyway. So that's the other challenge as a writer, is not just figuring out.
The violent scenes and stuff like that, and sometimes I know that's appealing to the audience.
Right.
In that sense, I mean, it's like you're writing things off. It's not necessarily good or bad, but it's appealing to the audience.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, let's see. There's a movie I just saw recently, Creed 3. It's the continuation of the Rocky series. Either one of you watch the Creed movies? I'm an old school Rocky fan, so this is just like a continuation. In Creed 2, oh my gosh, that blew me away because it takes all this stuff from the fourth movie and brings it all back up again, and it's so good. But in 3, gosh, if y'all haven't seen it, I don't want to give it away. Well, okay, there's this thing going on where his daughter is starting to be violent with other kids. They could have taken it a lot further, but the tone, the sort of tone they take it is like, well, she watches you hit people for a living. So she thinks that that's the way to address things. And he has to kind of step back from the fighter and be mad and be like, look, and he tries to do, I think he tries to do it initially, he's like, violence isn't the solution. And then he's like, okay, hold on. Sometimes you got to take care of things. He's like, all right, hon, but you need to know what situations those are. So, and I like that because it wasn't violence is never the answer, and it wasn't violence is always the answer. It was sometimes you got to handle things, how you got to handle them, but you need to know the time and place. Because somebody broke your pencil, you don't just slap them in the nose for that. If somebody's trying to hurt you, yeah, defend yourself. You've got to take care of things. So it was an interesting message that was put across that way, and I feel like I've seen similar concepts in other movies where this warrior, this fighter, had to help temper their child that sees them, fighting and winning and stuff like that. And like, okay, well, that's what I need to do. I need to do what Dad did. And Dad's like, there are other ways. You don't just have to hit things until you win. There are other ways to win. There are other ways to defeat your enemies, and that's another way you can go about it. So if it is an action movie, and let's say the main character has a dad that was just this rock star, athlete, martial artist, whatever, just beats up everybody that comes their way, but the main character never got there. No matter how hard they trained, no matter how hard they worked, they just were never as strong as dad. And so they feel defeated partway through the movie, the story, the book. I can't do it. I'm not as good as dad. I'm a failure. And then some message comes along, maybe through a mentor, maybe through a line of dialogue that sparks an idea in their head of like, okay, you're not the strongest. You're not the fastest. What are you good at? What can you do that will let you defeat these opponents that are stronger than you, faster than you, more skilled fighters than you? And then figuring that out, now that's your story. They have to go in a different direction. They have to learn something new, but it's applying skills that they have. It's taking, Mulan does that, the Disney movie, cartoon. She is not a warrior. She's not as strong as the men soldiers that have been trained their entire lives. So she has to figure out how to use her smarts to do the things that they're doing. And I feel like that movie does it really well. What's that?
I think it's based in real life.
Mulan? Is it really?
Well, they from Beijing told me that.
Okay.
I think it's shown in place in Beijing.
Okay. That's I did not know that.
Yes. When I first saw Pocahontas, I didn't know it was based in real life.
Oh, okay. No, that one I knew, yeah. Disney shies away from a lot of the really awful stuff that happened in Pocahontas because that wouldn't have made it a Disney movie. My wife and I were joking about how they're never going to make a live action Pocahontas because there's just too much that Disney doesn't want to tell that story.
Oh, yeah.
It's dark. Have you ever read it?
Oh, the real story.
Yeah.
Yeah, she dies in the book, but she doesn't report to the film.
Yeah, and she's not treated very well, and I think she catches some sort of disease, malaria, smallpox, something like that. It's not a happy ending. That's another phrase I've heard is whether your story is a happy ending or a sad ending sometimes depends on where you stop. There's this, I like to study history, there's this Byzantine emperor called Heraclius, and he has a 25-year war with Persia. It goes on and on and on. It's a knockdown, drag-out fight. And his side eventually wins. And if you stop the story there, it's about his triumph and he won. Then 10 years later or something like that, the Muslim armies all gather. And because Persia is no longer the superpower, they burst through Persia and they go right through him. And they just take everybody out. So whether it's a triumph or a tragedy for that character depends on when you start telling that story. And that's a decision you'll have to make in writing as well. It's like, where does the story end? Do I want it to end on a high point? Do I want it to end on a low point? And sometimes you might not decide until you're writing it. You might write it and partway through be like, okay, I want this to be a triumph, or I want this to be a tragedy. And tragedy, I feel like tragedy is misunderstood a lot because tragedy doesn't necessarily mean just that bad things happen to the main characters. In my opinion, the definition of tragedy is that bad things happened that could have been averted. because that's what makes it tragic, is that it didn't happen. So Romeo and Juliet, all these people didn't need to die if the two feuding families could have gotten over their BS. But and the reason why the true ending of the story is not them killing themselves. It's the fathers of the two households coming together at the funeral, being like, "We got to stop this. Look at everything that it's cost us." But it cost them all of that for them to finally wake up and be like, we can't do this anymore. And so that's why it's tragic. That's kind of going off on a different tangent there. But again, stuff that you can apply to your story. What are the lessons learned from the characters that maybe could have been avoided earlier on? Maybe they missed a milestone earlier on and did all these things that they go through all this turmoil that they didn't have to had they not made this mistake early on. Now, you want to make a mistake honest. Because I've definitely seen movies where they have the character just do something just stupid. And I'm like, everybody's suffering for no reason here. There's no reason for the character to have done what they did. So take a moment with those lessons and try to give it something that makes sense. That if you were in those circumstances, you're like, okay, I see why the main character did what they did. Because they were kind of painted into a corner. Like I mentioned Meet the Parents with Ben Stiller. I found the Ben Stiller character hard to empathize with because he just lies all the way throughout the movie. And had it been a couple of small lies or something like that, or if the dad had really been pressing him and then he got stammered, whatever, and then said something accidentally and then had to take care of that. But that wasn't what happened. He just lies all throughout the movie to try to make himself look better. And after a certain point, I'm like, you're just kind of a jerk. I don't even really it was funny to watch, but he wasn't a very empathetic character. You got anything you're working on? Oh, sorry, what did you say?
Just earlier, I was reading something about story spine.
Story what?
Story spine.
Story spine?
Yeah.
Spine of the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like, once upon a time, there was a blank. Every day they would blank. One day blank because of that, blank because of that.
Yes.
Because of that. Finally, ever since. And moves sort of, and it was like how Pixar had used that to like the Incredibles and what was it? Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
And how they those kind of
right.
Those examples.
I'd actually forgotten about Story Spine. So that is a really good one, and it's a good one to get you started at the very least.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, this, if you're sitting down and like, okay, I kind of want to do this story, but I don't know how to get started. That'll help you kind of begin that whole thing. Like, okay, now I've got all this different stuff that I can play with. We talked a little bit earlier about outlining. So two other outlines that I usually suggest writers take a look at is the 27 chapters. There's a bunch of articles about it online, but it's called 27 Chapters Outline. And what's nice about that one, I would say get your first draft, or at least get a rough draft together first, and then look at the 27 chapters and figure out, okay, here's the bits I'm missing. I can kind of, if you're lost. If you're not lost and you're like, what, this is great, I'm happy where it is, keep going. But if you are floundering for whatever reason, at some point you can look through there and like, okay, this is what traditionally happens in all of these styles of stories. Another one is a book called Save the Cat. I do not remember the author's name, but he's a pretty successful screenwriter, and he gives you a 15-point breakdown of how screenplays work. Now, even if you're not a screenwriter, even if you want to be a novelist, I think studying screenwriting is good because they are very, very strong on structure. Screenwriting, I was telling her about this earlier, I was saying this earlier, you have to hit your inciting incident between pages 5 and 7. You have to hit plot point 1 by, I think, page 20 or something like that. I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, oh, you're joking. I'm like, no, we're not joking. Because there's professional readers that they will look for those moments, and if they're not there, they toss the script. Pass on to the next thing. Because they know that they need to hit moments in that order in order for the story to play out the way it's supposed to, or at least for it to be filmed and engaging. So, and it might feel a little confining at first, but the nice thing about it is that you don't get lost in the quagmire of, like some people call it sagging middle, where you've written a bunch of stuff, you don't know where to go next, you don't even know how you got here, and it's like, okay, I look at these things, or the spine, and like, okay, let's get back to the basics. Let's figure out what where I need to go next, or what, maybe I missed something along the way. You know, maybe I wrote all this stuff, I'm like, oh, you know what, something like this needed to happen here. Write that, insert it in. It's so much, now that we write digitally all the time, you know, versus I feel terrible for people who just had to write everything out on paper before computers. We are very fortunate in that regard. We can just kind of drag and drop, you know. So go back, find things that you're missing, plunk it back in. Is there anything that you're working on right now?
No, I mean, just like, not necessarily, anthology, just poems and stuff.
Okay.
Like, future might be writing some more books on that.
Perfect. I've got a book in the back. If you want to join the mailing list, I've got an email. Look over there. If you want just to be kept up to date when I've got pointers and things going on, I can let you know. Do you have any questions? Anything that you're kind of either struggling with or just things that you've got questions on in the writing process?
I think not specifically. Right now I'm working on being better at storytelling. So I'm doing everything I can to learn storytelling.
Okay.
Whether conversation or even writing. I think writing and reading all comes together when it comes to communicating storytelling. So just kind of
Okay. All right. Probably the best advice that I've heard, this actually came from several different people, Neil Gaiman's who I think about it, is finish things. So if you write like short stories or novellas or anything like that, complete them. Because once you start completing stories, the process becomes less intimidating to you. Because I think I've known lots of early authors that they just get stuck in like, okay, I've got 5 chapters down, and I keep editing these 5 chapters. I'm like, okay, you've been editing those 5 chapters for like 3 years. Like, write more stuff, finish the story, get to the end, and even if it doesn't look anything like what you're going to publish, at least you know. So for instance, Age of Sphere is going to be a multi-book saga. I've got the first 3 books written. I cut 150 pages worth of stuff at one point because I just looked at it and I'm like, this doesn't fit anymore. You know, it fit with my earlier concept of the book, but after I'd written like 300 pages worth of stuff, I was like, this is too much action too quickly. This is a bunch of things that I need to have happen later on. I need to piece this out a little differently. And so I just cut it, you know, and it was awful. I didn't like cutting those 150 pages, but had I not written them, I wouldn't have gotten to where I got. Neil Gaiman also says you've got 1 million bad words in you, and as far as writing, just get them out of the way. Just write those 1 million words, get them out of the way, and then keep moving.
So not write it down.
In the beginning.
Just write it.
Yeah, don't get caught up in editing limbo either because you'll stay there forever. Get a rough draft on, and because sometimes you'll read the rough draft and be like, oh, this is a different story than I thought it was. You know, things will occur to you as you keep writing it, and then at the end, you'll be like, oh. I've listened to authors where they thought character X was the main character, and by the time they got the draft done, like, no, this is character Y's story. I need to flip this whole thing. But and it sinks rewriting that much stuff. But you're like, you know what? Now I know what I've got, and it's going to be a better story when I'm done.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem. Any other questions? All right. Yeah, like I said, if you want to sign up for the mailing list, it's on there. If you want a copy of the book, the $12 copy. If you want to hit me up on that. If you got any questions, so forget. Thank you all for coming.
Yes. Good luck with all the movies.
Oh, thank you.